Happy Monday to you. I hope you had a great Father's Day weekend. And we're going to just jump right in today. We are continuing our new series, Lessons from the Desert. Last week, we saw that God promised a woman, a slave, a minority, a future for herself and her son. He cares for everyone. He cares for you. I hope you hear that today. And she, in turn, Hagar had a revelation of God and who he was. She recognized him as the God who saw her. And so she was able to obey the command that he gave her to return to her external source of pain, Sarai, who had been mistreating her, and to deal with her internal source of pain, her rejection issues, her the victim cycle that she had fell prey to. And so she was dealing with all of that, and she was able to because she knew God saw her and that he was the one true God. So today we want to look at the rest of her story, but before we do, let's look at the big picture of the Abrahamic story. In Genesis 12, God calls Abraham to go to the promised land. He calls him out of Mesopotamia to go to the promised land, to be the nation that Israel and then the Messiah would come through. And so even the New Testament authors understood the full scope of this. Look at what the writer of Hebrews said. When God made his promise to Abraham, since there was no one greater for him to swear by, he swore by himself, saying, I surely will bless you and give you many descendants. And so after waiting patiently, Abraham received what was promised. People swear by someone greater than themselves, and the oath confirms what is said and puts an end to all argument. Because God wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose very clear to the heirs of what was promised, he confirmed it with an oath. God did this so that, by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled to take hold of the hope set before us may be greatly encouraged. There are two unchangeables about God: God's nature and God's promises. God is truth, and so he cannot lie. And because he is truth, he keeps his promises. Because he cannot lie, he is a promise keeper, and we can stand firm on that foundation. And that's what Hagar was able to do. She was able to stand firm on that foundation. And you'll see how difficult it was going to be when she goes back and what occurs when her son is a teenager. So, two unchangeables: God's nature and God's promises. Genesis 15, this is when Abraham believes that Lot might be the possible heir. He's like, I don't have an heir. Maybe Lot will be my heir. And then 16 is where Hagar comes to play, and that's where she sleeps with Abraham, and he has a surrogate heir with her. So back to Hagar. If she was here, what would we ask her? I would ask her, what did she do when she originally went back to them? Did she sleep with Abraham still? Did Sarah start to treat her any better? What was it like when Ishmael was born? After he was weaned, did Sarai take him from her and treat him as her son? Did Sarai ease up on her once the baby was born? All these things I think about because of Hagar's obedience and going back and being in the household. What was it like when she went back? Did she tell them about her revelation of the one true God? I wonder that. I don't know the answers, but I assume that she assumed the promise was being fulfilled. She went back, she has the baby, and she assumes that the promise is being fulfilled because Sarai still isn't pregnant. So there's still no other baby. And it was being fulfilled in a sense. But the life she was living was a part of the process. It wasn't the end product. And it wasn't the answer that she thought. Has that ever happened to you? God speaks into your life. He gives you a promise and you stand on that promise. And then it falls apart, so to speak. It falls through because our finite minds assumed that it was going to happen and it was going to happen when we wanted it to happen. And then it takes time because God's not on our timeline, right? And that's probably what was going on with her. The unfinished part, when we're going through the process and waiting on the promise that God has given us, the unfinished part can either lead to discouragement or discovery. And sometimes it leads to both. It leads to discouragement first. I understand that very well. And then discovery of who God is and that He is sovereign and that He cares for us and He is unchanging and He is a promise keeper. Let me share a story with you about when this became, I've had a lot of trials in my life, but this became so real to me during our adoption process, our second adoption process. After 2 years going through the process, God released us to go to Haiti, and that was because our orphanage had been looted and all the children, remaining children, were separated into different orphanages, government orphanages in Port-au-Prince. And so we had resisted taking matters into our own hands. We knew a coup was coming and things had not been going very well, but we resisted taking things into our own hands until God released us to go at this point. And we had God's approval and we had the approval of the American pastor who had a death wish on his head and who had a child that they were in the process of adopting as well. And so we go down there and it was just, we get our work situated quickly and our life, we have a child here in the States and get all arrangements for her all settled. And the Lord releases us to go down there. And so we change our tickets, we get down there and we arrive. And the first blessing was that we arrive safely, right? That's always a blessing. And the second thing is that we were safe at the airport. If you've ever been to the Port-au-Prince airport, you understand what I'm talking about, or even any third world airport probably. The driver seems reputable, as does the boy that's there to greet us and escort us to the missionary house. So things are going well, and we're thinking, okay, we can do this. I mean, because we don't have anyone that we know at this point except for the one ministry team member who was willing to help us. All the other ministry team members from the orphanage and the organization were either in jail or in hiding, except for this one. And he wasn't even either of those because he had been working with the bad guys. But now he's willing to help us because we're willing to pay him more money than the bad guys were paying. So we do that, and we take our chances, right? So here's the promise, we think, being fulfilled after 24 months of expectancy, right? We've been in this process for 2 years. Something that was supposed to cost $12,000 is already over $30,000 into it. And the Lord is making a way. So we find through this guy, we were able to find the birth mother, and we take her to social services where we bribe them to give us the information to where our boys are, what orphanage they had taken them to, and this little girl, the pastor's daughter. And then we go to that orphanage and we bribe the main people to let us enter the area, and then we trek up this mountain, and then we bribe the orphanage workers, and so huge hurdle accomplished. I mean, things are getting done. And so we're like, okay, we find our paperwork, we go to immigration, we go to the consulate and the doctor, and we are out of here. And finding a doctor was difficult, but the Lord provided there, and it was terrible because they have the needles from like 1950, and they have to stick them in the little malnourished arms of our children, and reusable needles, right? And so, but the next day we were able to do that and find our paperwork, and it's all together. Our dossier is all together, and because the one team member who was in hiding had the wisdom to gather all of that, as the orphanage is being looted, and take it to a lawyer. So, okay, we got our paperwork, we got the doctor's appointment, we got our kids, immigration, consulate, home. We're out of here. And so we arrive at immigration the next day after picking up their birth mom, because the birth parents have, if they are alive, they have to be present to prove that we are, first of all, not buying children, and second of all, that they were truly abandoned, right? And so even the birth father shows up, which was a miracle again, because he, during our 2-year process, he would not show up to things or be cooperative from our American standpoint, because he was a street vendor, and already he felt like his children he did what was right for his children. They were living in an orphanage where they had meals and a roof over their head, and that was, he had done what was best for them, because here he is, a street vendor, and we're asking him to come off the street and go do these appointments or whatever was required, and that meant maybe he wouldn't eat that day. And so he shows up to the appointment, and we're like, all right, we're going home in a couple days, and we're taking our children with us, and we're just so overwhelmingly thankful and grateful. And so the parents go in to the immigration officer and they have their interviews, and the immigration officer comes out and she tells us that she doesn't believe their story. The parents' stories are conflicting. And so she was going to require that we get DNA testing on our sons. And we're like, oh, okay, all right, well, let's get this done. Let's do this. And so then we find out that, that it has to go to Boston, and it's going to take 3 weeks for that to happen. It's going to take 3 weeks for that to be processed. Devastation. Here we are, and we're like, the rug is pulled out from under us. We're so disappointed. We have a child at home. We have jobs at home. We can't stay in Haiti for 3 weeks. But here we just rescued our sons, and now we have them. What are we going to do with them? We can't take them back to the government orphanage, where that's a whole part of the story, and of corruption and all kinds of things. And so we just did not know what to do. No consulate. No home with our children. Well, there's more to that story, but that's all I'm going to tell you for now, because that's probably what Hagar felt like. That's what she felt like when she heard the news that Sarah was going to have a baby, and that her son, what she thought was the fulfillment of the promise was that God had given her, that, it wasn't going to be fulfilled how she thought it was going to be fulfilled. Her promise and her peace were now fleeing. And she's probably asking herself, kind of like I did, like, where are you, God? What do we do now? What didn't you tell us to adopt these boys? She's finally saying, where is the God who sees me now? So, chapter 17, this is when the circumcision of Abraham at 99 years old, I might add, and Ishmael, who's a teenager at this point, close to being a teenager at this point, they are circumcised. And then this is also when God gives the promise to Abraham and tells him that Sarah is going to have a baby. God also said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. Abraham understands that Ishmael is not destined to be the covenant heir. He hears it from God right now, and he loves Ishmael. Remember how we were calling him so not nice names last week, because we were like, he didn't care about sending Hagar away and his unborn child. Well, now after, over 10 years, he's come to love his son and has a relationship with him. And he realizes that he's not going to be the covenant heir, and that here it takes a lot of faith to think that Sarah's going to have a baby at 90 years old and him at 100. Nonetheless, he held on to the hope that God might relent in the absence of a son by Sarah, but now he knows he's not going to. He pleads with God, but is denied. Yet Yahweh affirms that the promise he gave to Hagar, that Ishmael would be blessed and be the father of a great nation, would also be the case. He is going to have he got the same promise as Isaac, right? That he's going to have the favor of the Lord, because he's bound by the Abrahamic covenant, by the community, by the rite of circumcision, even more so. Did you ever think about that? It is the special claim of Ishmael and his offspring to the promise of God. Ishmael was not the heir, but he was a beneficiary. He was the beneficiary. Well, in chapter 18, Abraham intercedes for Sodom. In chapter 19 is when Lot is delivered from Sodom and Gomorrah. Genesis 20, Abraham doesn't learn the first time, and this is his second attempt to pass Sarah off as a sister. And then in Genesis 21 is when Isaac is born. Isaac is born. He's 100 years old. And when weaned, Sarah tells Abraham to expel Hagar and Ishmael. And God confirms that this is what he needs to do. And so at this point, Abraham's 102, 103. Ishmael's definitely a teenager by this point. And let's read that. The child grew and was weaned, and on the day that Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking, and she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." The matter distressed Abraham greatly, because it concerned his son. But God said to him, "Do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring." So we know that Abraham is not perfect, but this time he doesn't give in to Sarah, especially because an act was illegally condemned to shun your family, to send your son off, right? It's his son. But he gives into God, for God commanded him to cut Ishmael off so there might be no misunderstanding. Isaac is the covenant heir, not Ishmael. That's not the main reason that Sarah even cared about it. She didn't care about the covenant so much. She cared about the economic security of it, probably. I mean, she understood God, but she definitely knew that she did not want her son sharing in the economic inheritance of that, because Abraham by this point is very, very wealthy. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. Here she is, her second season in the desert. Oh, poor Hagar. And it sounds like, okay, he just sends her off. I mean, it had to be so dramatic and so traumatic for Ishmael, and definitely for Abraham, and so difficult for them. But it sounds like, that it just sends them off and they just go off, and that's definitely not the case. It wasn't like, hi ho, I'm a victim of no. Come on, let's go. Hi ho, hi ho, hi ho. No, it had to be so horrible for them. She knew the God who saw her, and she knew that he took care of her before. But have we forgotten Her son was going to be filthy rich heir, and now she's being abandoned to the desert with water and some food that's going to last how long? Let's read on. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there, she began to sob. As the physical water dried up, so did her remembrance of the living water, her Father that saw her, God. And she puts him under a bush about a bow shot away. And even though she does not flee this time, her stinking thinking starts coming back. Remember that stinking thinking? She says, I cannot watch the boy die, which kind of equates to I'm helpless. Remember the victim cycle we talked about last week that she was a part of? I'm helpless, and so I am full of spite, and because you have this and I don't, I despise you, and therefore I'm a victim. So the stinking thinking, this mentality starts to come back to her. I cannot watch the boy die equals I'm helpless. He's helpless. I'm helpless. I can't help my child. So I'm going to set him over here and I'm going to go over here because I cannot take it. Who blames her, right? Who blames her? And at this juncture is when God says, let me go back. I cannot watch the boy die. Then she began to sob, which included despising Abe and Sarah. Now let's look the next part. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. At this juncture, God says, enough is enough. Stop stinking thinking in his ever patient, loving, fatherly way, right? He says, what's the matter, Hagar? What's the matter? He comforts his daughter and tells her not to be afraid. Not only do I care for you, and not only did I make a promise to you, I care for your son. Actually, he cares for her son more than even she does, right? And I'm going to keep the promise I made to you the first time in the desert. The promise that your son is going to also be a great nation. You are not helpless. Do not despise. You are not a victim. He reminds Hagar. To prove it, God tells him, I want you to go lift up the boy, and I want you to take him by the hand. I am a promise keeper. In our last lesson, we learned God promises. This lesson, we're learning God keeps his promise. If she didn't go to the desert, how would God keep his promise? She thought he was keeping his promise by Sarah not having a baby. But when the heir comes, when Isaac comes, God has to send them by the way of the desert so that he can keep his promise. Trust him, friends. And it says he's going to make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. Notice that after she obeys God is when she sees the living water. She obeys the living water, and then she sees the physical water. God opens her eyes and she's able to see because her stinking thinking isn't clouding her vision anymore. She saw what was already there. Don't give up. Don't give up. Don't create something new to help God out. He doesn't need our help. He has it under control. Just stand on a firm foundation that he is the promise keeper. Have faith. Keep hope. Read the Psalms. Read Proverbs. Keep your faith. Be in community with other believers that will encourage your heart. Open the eyes of your heart. The desert is the way to promise. Hagar shows us that. Don't be afraid of the desert. It is a way to promise. And to show you that, take a look at this. This picture is about 10 years old, but it shows you that God is a promise keeper. And we were able to get our 2 sons from Haiti, and then they were joined by a younger brother about 2 years later. So God is a promise keeper. Trust him. All right, next week we continue our series on Lessons from the Desert. See you then.